So when you put energy into it, because you're breaking down glucose, you add phosphates on here, and when you spend it to drive the reactions of your cell, you just break that phosphate off. And it's kind of like a charged and discharged battery. You charge it up with that extra bond, then you can break the bond, discharge the energy, and help drive some other reaction in the cell. So where is that energy? Absolutely right. It's pointing at that last bond in the molecule. So what I'm going to do is I rewrote the equation for cell respiration up on the top. And we're going to walk through the process, the main sort of key elements of cell respiration. And as we do it, we're going to try to identify when all these carbons get broken down, that is broken apart in the glucose and released as carbon dioxide. And we're going to try to figure out where the oxygen gets consumed and where the water gets produced. And then finally, we're going to figure out where those lots and lots of ATP actually are made. So I'll leave it up there, and as we walk through the process, the steps of it, we'll cross off the reactants and the products as they're consumed or made. Make sense? Okay. So remember this molecule. ATP, you guys got that down? Because there's one other molecule we need to become familiar with. And this other molecule is known as NADH in its charged up form, and in its discharged form as NAD+. Because one of the key things that occurs during cell respiration is electrons get, in essence, stripped away from the food and carried to other reactions through this intermediary molecule called NADH. So the job of NADH is to act as an electron carrier. So it shuttles electrons back and forth between different reactions that give them up and reactions that use them. Kind of like your battery can help drive current. You can plug it into the wall, and then you can put it into a device and drive current through it to cause something to occur. So NAD, don't be confused by this diagram. The only thing I want you to see on it is NAD+ is the discharged form, and when you add 2 electrons to it, you charge it up with electrons, and it converts into NADH. So the discharged form and the charged form. Do you want to see what NADH really looks like? Or are you happy just seeing it as a little puzzle piece? So remember ATP. All right, you guys remember ATP? Here's how to remember it. It's a 5- and 6-sided nitrogen-rich ring connected to a 5-sided carbon ring with an oxygen to phosphates. This is NAD+. Do you see any similarities? Kind of crazy, right? Actually, it's just 5-sided, 6-sided ring connected to a sugar, to 1,2 phosphates, to a sugar, to this other weird thing we haven't seen before, right? So this other weird thing that we haven't seen before, this is where those electrons get stored. So this positive charge, the chemical nature of that molecule allows it to accept electrons and give up electrons very easily. But do you see how all it is a molecule connected to ATP? Pretty crazy, right? One molecule that's used for all of these different purposes. We're going to see it one more time too. Right? It's going to be very exciting. Okay, so you guys, how do you feel about NADH, its job? Okay. I'm going to skip over these 2 and that. You'll talk about those. Just pretend you didn't see those slides. I'm going to reshuffle a little bit of content here. So this is a schematic showing where some of the major key moments of cell respiration occur. So on the back of your sheet, if you flip it over, you'll see there's a beautifully artistically rendered diagram of a cell. And then inside the cell, there's this weird thing. All right? We're going to draw these up and then walk through all the steps and tell you where they occur within the cell. So I'll erase my electron carrier, and I'll put my cell up here. So this entire structure is the cell. Most of the cell is water, right? Most of the interior is water. And in fact, there's kind of this jelly-like substance that fills the cell. It's called the cytoplasm. And then inside the cell, there's all of these subcompartments where different things occur. We're only going to talk about a subset of them. We're not going to talk about every single structure within the cell. And we're not going to have you guys just memorize the names of the structures and what they do. We're going to introduce the structures as we talk about the details of what actually occurs there. So the first structure within the cell we're going to talk about is the mitochondria. So this whole structure here is the mitochondria. And inside the mitochondria, well, it's a membrane wrapped around another membrane. So it's kind of like a water balloon inside of a water balloon, inside of a water balloon, which is the cell, if you can visualize that. So there's like a water balloon, inside a water balloon, inside of a water balloon. All of these lines I've drawn up here are just membrane, right? They're just phospholipid bilayers. So we want to name all of these compartments within the cell because they're all separated from each other by membrane. And so we can keep things separate because not everything can cross the membrane. So we call the very interior of the mitochondria the matrix. And then we call this space between the membranes, very creatively, what?
Outer.
The intermembrane space.
Oh.
Scientists can be very dull and literal at times. What should we call this thing? Let's call it the intermembrane space. So this is indeed the intermembrane space. So we're going to split all of cell respiration into 4 steps. All right? The first step we're going to go through is a step that's called glycolysis. The second step we're going to talk about is one called pyruvate oxidation. The third step is something called the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. And then the fourth step is, I never quite know what to call this step. On my slide, I'm going to call it oxidative phosphorylation, and I regretfully named it that here. All right? A better term for it would be chemiosmosis. But if you don't like that word, and by the way, look at that word. I know it's new, but I don't think it should be unfamiliar. What is osmosis? Diffusion of water across a membrane. So chemiosmosis, you can kind of imagine, might be, yeah, the diffusion of chemicals across a membrane. So if you don't like chemiosmosis, you can also just remember it as the fourth step is when you actually take ADP and convert it into ATP. So the goal is accomplished in the final step. Yeah.
Is this final step what they call the electron transport chain in the book?
electron transport chain and chemiosmosis, yeah.